I've always loved that quote by Krishna. You know, for the person who realizes God, it's just like a person needing a well when the land is covered in flood. I've just loved that visualization. And it's interesting that the Vedas were written in a time at a very high age when people's understanding and communication and God contact was ever present, and their worship and their daily lives were one. And so they didn't need a separate time for worship and a separate time for the rest of their actions. In those high ages, every one of their actions was being given and offered to God. But as the ages descended, the priests, the sages, started writing down what they had learned, and it came down through the ages, and it became more ritualistic. And as man also descended in consciousness from a high age to a lower age, their worship became more ego conscious and more worldly aspiring, so that at a certain point, men were sort of bartering with the gods, saying, if I do this ritual, you please give me this. So it was no longer a self-offering. It was, I'll do these mantras, I'll do these rituals, but you must help me to be wealthy. You must help me to get power, to find the perfect spouse, or to have children. So what Krishna is saying here is, don't be satisfied with these lesser aspirations. You know, he says at another point in the Gita, those who worship their ancestors and the lesser gods will go to their ancestors and the lesser gods. But those who worship me will come to me. So he's saying, why would you pray for a teaspoonful of soil when I can give you the whole kingdom? And so this is what he's counseling Arjuna. And then 2 centuries later, of course, Buddha was born, and his message was somewhat similar. And he was discouraged and against karmakand, of just paying priests to do rituals in the perfect Sanskrit intonation, but with no self-effort on the devotee's part, and said, you know, we cannot achieve self-realization, we cannot purify ourselves, transform ourselves with no effort, and just to pay some priest to do this ritual. So that's why Buddhism became so strong during that period of time, because people understood, used their common sense to understand. This was an experience they could perceive, that how could just paying this priest to do this ritual transform me and give me everything I need? And so then Jesus Christ came after Buddha, and he said, seek ye first the kingdom of God. First concentrate on God, and everything else will come to you. And of course, he came during the times of also a dogmatic, corrupt priesthood in the Jewish tradition at that time. And he was preaching love, not the law, not fear, but love. And at one point, one of the senior members of the Jewish council said to him, by what authority are you teaching? And Swami tells us in this reading, actually in a different area in the Gita, explanations, essence of the Bhagavad Gita, that when people are more dogmatic, they always resort to quoting the scriptures. And so this high priest of Israel was saying, where in the scriptures does it say that? And Jesus looked at him and said, don't you know? Haven't you experienced this yourself? We have experienced, we know what we're talking about. He used the word we. We know what we speak of. How can you be a high priest of Israel and not understand these things? And so he was telling his followers, use common sense. All the parables that he spoke of, use common sense, because mostly Jesus was talking to the masses that were ignorant. And so he would use these simple parables that had common sense. But to his disciples, he pushed them more to go beyond common sense and to use their intuitive understanding to perceive who he is. Remember, at one point he said, "Who do you think I am?" And Peter said, "You are the Christ." And Jesus said, "Your name is Peter." He gave him then the spiritual name Peter, and said, upon this foundation I will build my church, meaning on intuitive perception. You could only have understood this fact that I am the Christ through your intuition. I have not said it, I have not spoken it, I have not told anybody that, but the fact that you perceived it. Through this intuition, I want to build my original teachings. And then you probably remember the story, perhaps from the new path that Swami Kriyananda has written, when Yogananda was starting his school in Ranchi, and he needed land. The Maharaja of Kasim Bazar was offering to give him land for his school. And the day that he was going to make that decision, he invited Yogananda to come to his house. But at the same time, he wanted to test Yogananda. Did he know the spiritual teachings? And so he brought these pundits along. And Yogananda says these pundits were ready for a theological bullfight. And he said he could see it from the beginning that they were just going to talk scriptures and dogma. And so Yogananda said, I headed it off at the pass. And I said to them, in the scriptures it is written that there are 4 aspects of human consciousness. It says also that they are located in the body, but it doesn't say where. He asked the pundits, where in the body are these 4 aspects located? Mon, Buddhi, Ahankara, and Chitta. And these pundits could not answer because they had not experienced those aspects of consciousness. But since Master Yoganandaji had experienced, he told them that Mon was located at the top of the head, that Buddhi at the spiritual eye, Ahankara at the medulla, and Chitta in the heart. So the Maharaja of Kasim Bazar gave him the land, and that's where he started his first school. But the scientific age, when there was that revolution of scientific discoveries, when they, for example, discovered that that our Earth was not the center of the universe or of our solar system, it was the sun. Then science became more and more to the forefront, and it very much challenged religious dogma. And people started to understand we need to test our beliefs. And no longer could the church keep asking people to follow blindly beliefs that they were telling them. And so, isn't that so with our masters? They come and they say, this worked for me. That Babaji taught Lahiri Mahashaya Kriya Yoga, that Lahiri practiced Kriya Yoga, shared it in Varanasi to so many souls, and including Sri Yukteswar, who taught it to Master, and it transformed their lives. Of course, they were born avatars. It's not exactly a perfect example, but they lived this life. These avatars took birth on earth to show us this is how we did it, even though we may not have done it in this lifetime because they were already enlightened. But this is how we did it. If you follow what we teach you, you also will be able to do it. You need to have your own experience. Try it. Is it practical? Does it work? And that is why Yogananda's teachings in America hit such a popular chord, because it gave practical results almost immediately. And for most of you who have learned meditation, probably through Ananda, if you're watching the Satsang, you probably learned that practicing Hong Sa, practicing pranayam, gazing up at the spiritual eye, learning how to dive into the stillness, learning how to bring energy up and down your spine, started to transform your consciousness. Your life became more centered, more balanced, your relationships got better. So it was through our own experience that we realized these teachings work. And so, as Jesus said, by their fruits you shall know them. So by the fruits of the teachings that our masters have given us, do we know their validity, and also do we know the wisdom, the infinite consciousness that they convey to us through their vibration. So let's think of Kriya Yoga. What does that do for us? You know, it helps us to look very clearly at what is. Maybe we can perceive as we grow wiser that we have certain characteristics that we need to overcome. When we practice the yamas and niyamas, when we practice Kriya Yoga, suddenly we start to become more aware perhaps of our character defects, of our faults. But then does that make us cower in, let's say, does that overwhelm us with depression that we have these faults? No. Do we have to identify with these faults? No. Do we need to fight the battle to overcome them? Yes. So Kriya is going to help us grow in evolution because it helps us to accelerate our evolution. You know, and when we accelerate our evolution, it may bring up karma, good and bad. Yogananda said, Kriya is the airplane route to God. So do we want that? It just brings up our karma. So it brings up perhaps our bad qualities that we need to look at and transform through the practice of Kriya Yoga, through devotion, through seva. And it also brings up our good karma. It brings us closer to our guru, to our spiritual family. It increases devotion within us. So it accelerates our karma. And when we think of doing Kriya Yoga or any of our practices, what are we doing? We're like doing an inner ritual, an inner yagya, an inner fire ceremony to offer up every breath to God, to Divine Mother, to the Guru, to be purified. And this is what we do every Sunday with our fire ceremony, is that we're doing an outward ritual to symbolize what we're doing with our practice of Kriya Yoga. And so as we do Kriya, and the fruits of our practice become manifest, as in good karma, bad karma, we know we're offering these fruits up at the spiritual eye. And we don't hold on to what emerges, but we offer in self-offering and receive back the grace, the blessings, the prasad of God and Guru. And so when we make that self-offering, and every time we practice Kriya, in every act throughout the day, when we make that self-offering, we can receive back their blessings, their grace, their vibration, and it lives within us. It lives within our spine. It lives within our consciousness, and it will be with us eternally. And we think also, by their fruits we shall know them. Look at Yogananda. He wrote Autobiography of a Yogi. Think of the millions of people that have read that book. Think of the millions of lives that he has transformed through that book. By their fruits ye shall know them. Look at the disciples of Yogananda. Look at the life of Swami Kriyananda. He was a disciple for 60 plus years. I should know how many exactly, but not this moment, I'm not remembering. Gave his life from age of 22, created spiritual communities, wrote 150 books, wrote all of these songs, created these temples and meditation groups to help others transform their own consciousness. We can ask, what do we think of the fruits of Master's disciple Swami Kriyananda? And what about the fruits of Swami Kriyananda's life? All of those that have found Master through Ananda, all of those who have learned the teachings through Ananda, all of the people that he's trained over those 60 years, the acharyas now that are leading Ananda. I mean, what about their fruits? So we can look at the fruits and know the source. You know, a good fruit cannot come from a corrupt tree. When I came to Ananda in the mid-90s, there was a lot of controversy. There was a lawsuit by a bigger organization against Ananda for using Yogananda's images, quoting him, reading from the Autobiography, these things. And as Ananda was mainly achieving success in that lawsuit, they started to become more personal and becoming very attacking on Swami Kriyananda's life, slandering him. And that's the time that I came to Ananda. And it was in the Bay Area where the center of all of this was happening. And others were concerned about these accusations. But I had been going to Ananda for, 6 months or so. I had been learning from the acharyas there. I had been going to the temple there. And I just looked at all of these people that had been trained by Swami Kriyananda over the past 30 years. I felt my own joy in my heart when I entered that temple. I could feel the vibration of Master, of Babaji, of the Gurus. And I said, through my own heart and my own intuition, I said, it is not possible that this goodness, that this joy, that this wisdom, that this sincerity, that this humility of all of these students of Swami Kriyananda could come from a corrupt tree. And I just made my own decision. It's not possible. And so I stayed, and I'm so glad I stayed, but there were people who left because they didn't trust their own experience or they hadn't had their own experience. So, so we have to ask ourselves, what is our own experience? What have I learned through Ananda? What have I gained through tuning into the vibration of Yogananda, of Babaji, of our masters? You know, am I experiencing more peace, more light, more wisdom, more love in my life? Am I able to be an instrument of that peace, that light, that love in my life? Can I share it with others in my service to God and Guru? And if the answer is yes, that means, do the teachings work? Are they practical? Am I experiencing this? Can I share it? If the answer is yes, we ourselves are the fruit of Swami Kriyananda, of our line of masters, of the reasons why they were born, why they came. And we are that fruit. And people will know the tree of the great masters by us, their disciples. So we have a responsibility to experience what they are giving us, to do the practices. Some people say, oh, I just feel devotion, I'm not going to do the practices. That's not what they asked us to do. We can transform ourselves through our devotion, but what they each manifested on earth to give us, the practices of Kriya Yoga. And it does, in fact, transform us by our own self-effort and by the consciousness and grace of the masters. And so we can't just tell others, you should read the book, Autobiography of a Yogi, it will transform you. Or, you know, you should go to Ananda Sangha Satsang because being in that environment really uplifts your consciousness. You'll feel much happier. You know, you can't just tell that to other people. They have to have their own experience on their own. but you can share your vibration and they can experience your vibration. Swami Kriyananda wrote, God's truth is like a vast ocean in which all the scriptures of the world are like drops. Let us, if we would attain true wisdom, use scripture as a guideline to reality, but never as a substitute for it. Yogananda said, one day self-realization will be the religion of the world. As people learn to experience within their own self the realization of God. And the great masters come to show us our own potential. We must take their lives, their sacrifice for manifesting in this limited world very seriously and do what they have asked us. I'll just end with, we know Easter's actually coming up, but during the Last Supper, Jesus said to his disciples, love one another as I have loved you. Love one another as I have loved you. By this, people will know you are my disciples. So let's love one another as we have been loved by our gurus and by Krishna and by Christ. And others will know that we are their disciples. Joy to you.